So I'm Michael Vrhel, and I'm with Artifex software, and I'll be talking today about high security PDF redactions. And I'll be focusing a lot on the problems that exist in current workflows dealing with PDF redaction. And so we'll get started. It's interesting to look at the etymology of the word redact. It actually has been around for quite a long time, but its usage as we understand it today is relatively new. That is one of blacking out portions of a document. One of the first references to this was back in 1958, where they were looking at restricting the contents of a particular document. And then it's not until 1973 that there was one of the first publications of trying to, or mentions of blacking out names in a particular document. And then 20 years later, in 1993, Adobe introduced the PDF specification. And 5 years after that, in 1998, Appligent received a patent for doing PDF redaction. In 2006, Adobe published a technical note providing some guidance on PDF redaction, and also introduced an addendum to PDF version 1.7, where they introduced the redaction annotation. And then we fast forward all the way to 2019, where there was one of the more public uses of redaction in PDF with the Mueller report, and Duff, I guess last year, did a nice presentation at one of the PDF Association meetings where he gave his thoughts about that particular document. And today now there are, of course, a large number of vendors out there who provide solutions for doing PDF redaction. This is not an exhaustive list. This is me, knowing of some and Googling to find out who else is out there. And if I left anyone off, I apologize. You can send me an email and I'll make sure that it doesn't happen again. So the problem that we're faced is that there's been quite a history of failures here in the use of PDF and redaction. And I'm not going to go over these in detail, but here at the bottom we have one, even in 2019, when Paul Manafort's lawyers submitted a PDF that had black boxes drawn over the text to be redacted, but they didn't actually delete the information that was underneath it. And that tends to be the common theme in all of these, is that people are, basically covering up material without the realization that, that content still exists in the document. In 2018, there was this Facebook legal document that basically showed Facebook had considered selling deep access to data to other corporations. And I did a little bit of searching and was able to actually find that document still on the internet in its redacted PDF form, supposedly redacted form. And this is on the left here is a screenshot of one of the pages from the PDF. And I went ahead and selected those blacked out regions and copied them and pasted them into just a text editor, and you can see the content that was present in the document, which is that Facebook was going to was engaged in a scheme to trade access to data to extract large sums of payments from their partners. Not the kind of stuff that you really want to have out there. So the difficulties, there's a few difficulties. One is obviously human error with the use of the software. People aren't aware of how the document format works, and that simply placing black boxes over the content doesn't make the information go away. There can always be software errors due to bugs or even from poorly designed software. The PDF document is a complex format, and it's quite easy for information to hide. And even if we spent time plugging all the places where we have problems, at the end of the day, we don't really know what we don't know. There could always be something else lurking out there, and someone clever enough to get information hasn't quite found it yet, but it could still be there. And then you couple that with the fact that the cost of failures can be quite significant today. In 2018, the EU passed the General Data Protection Regulation, and this affects all member states and makes them accountable to and responsible for the data that they hold and process. And the fines are hefty if they fail to meet that. The fines max out at 20 million euros or 4% of worldwide revenue from the preceding year, whichever is higher. So given that the cost can be quite significant, you have to ask yourself if you're using a particular solution, do you know if that redaction solution works? Is it leaking information? Is it really removing everything? And do you know what the code is doing? So let's look a little bit at the standard PDF redaction process. Typically, it involves a couple steps. Usually a region to be redacted is identified with a black rectangle or some type of rectangle. And then once those regions have been verified as being of interest, the application has to remove that information underneath the rectangle. Some applications have an additional sanitize step that's used to remove metadata and or possibly hidden information that might be in the document. So I've kind of classified failures in different categories. I have kind of the obvious failures, which is that text is still contained underneath a solid rectangle. And that large list that I showed of failures before, that all those fall under this category. It really is the most common failure of the past. Today, if you try and do that with Acrobat Pro, Acrobat Pro is quite nice in that it gives you this message that says covering text or image with colored highlight will not permanently remove it, and they suggest that you use the redact tool instead if that's what you really are looking for. So hopefully that kind of prompt will avoid these failures in the future. Then we move into the less obvious failures. Here, for example, invisible text can be present in the document. In this particular case, I have a screenshot of a redacted document where all I've done is redacted the password content here. And then in the redacted document, I went ahead and selected all the text on that page. And you can see that the only text that is present is the text that I see. But I could have a situation where here I've done the same thing with another document, and then I went ahead and selected all the text, and you can see that there's some text that was invisible and it's still present in the document after doing the redaction. Now, if in Acrobat Pro, if you choose to do the sanitize step, and it will go, it actually does, at least it appears to me that it does a little bit of analysis and determines if there's text that's been drawn or material that's been drawn with that's completely transparent, or if you've drawn with white text, then it will actually render that particular page to an image, which would effectively remove that information. So that again still is the less obvious failures. Now we have a category that I call the even less obvious failures. And that is one where subset fonts can still retain information after doing redaction annotations. So here, so subset fonts, the idea of a subset font is that instead of embedding the entire font into the document, only information about the characters or glyphs that exist in the document, that information is stored in the document. So if I have, if I only had one letter, for example, in my whole entire document, then that would be the only letter that's stored in the font. So here again, I'm running Acrobat Pro, the most recent version. And I don't mean to pick on Adobe, but let's face it, they invented PDF, so it's the obvious choice here to play with. So I've got this document, it's just a single page, and this is the content. And I went ahead and did the redactions. I redacted some of the content here, including my, so I have my little password here. Pay attention to the characters that exist in the password. So I went ahead and did the redaction. I also did the sanitize step to remove hidden information. And then I went and saved the redacted document, and then I opened up the document with a text editor. Actually, I decompressed the streams and then opened it up with a text editor and looked at some of the contents. And in particular, I looked at the Unicode character map in the redacted file. So this is a particular object in the PDF document, object number 15 in this case. And here you see this list here, and this is basically a list of characters. And these numbers here in the middle represent the basically their ASCII codes for the characters. And I've placed the characters here on the far right that are associated with those. And then what I've done here on the next slide, I've highlighted in red the characters that are appearing in the character map, but they don't appear in the document. So that's information that someone could actually get to determine and that, hey, these characters are being used in the blacked out regions. And that represents information leakage that, while it doesn't give me exactly what, the order of the characters that appeared, it certainly is information that in certain cases could be troublesome. The problem is even a little bit worse than that, though, in certain cases, as some applications write out the character map in the order that the characters appear. So this is the same document created and redacted in the same fashion. Looked at the object in this case. This happened to be object 16 in there. And you can see that the character map's a little bit different, but the order of the characters is different also. You can see that all my password characters happen to be right here. I've highlighted them in red. They happen to be right there at the end of the character map. So there's even more information. Now in this particular case, they're not in the proper order as they were, but there are applications that will write them out that way too. So this particular problem was actually demonstrated by an Australian government study some time ago, and all I did was verify that the problem still exists today. I was kind of curious, though, if there were any other issues, and so I poked around a little bit, and I created the same document using Type 3 fonts. And a Type 3 font is different in that each character is defined by a content stream. And the content stream can contain path and image objects. And the dictionary for each character is referenced in the character prox entry of the Type 3 font dictionary. These characters are subset, similar to what I just showed with the character map. So I created the same document, again, this time with the Type 3 fonts, and did the same process of doing the redaction and doing the sanitize step with Acrobat Pro. And then I decompressed the streams in the PDF document and of the redacted document and opened it up with a text editor to see what I could see. And here I have object 55, which is a Type 3 font. It's giving me a reference to the character prox, which is object 52. Object 52 has a number of references. Each of these would basically represent the character. So I went ahead and wrote a little bit of code to render each of these. They actually ended up just being images. So after that, I went ahead and rendered them, and there's the information again about my password that I had redacted. So again, this is troublesome in that there's information there. While it's not, it takes a little bit of work. It's there, and it could be an issue in certain high security cases. There's also issues. I kind of classify another one is malicious information hiding, and it's unlikely, but it's possible that someone could have information that could be contained, for example, in ICC profiles. ICC profiles themselves can have private tags, which basically can have anything in them in terms of information. And then there's, of course, that PDF creators put all kinds of stuff inside a PDF packed into various objects with, for whatever reasons that they need. And, getting rid of that information might be a problem for some software. So the situation or the problem is really boils down to this, is that the existing solutions tend to take an existing PDF file and cut it down. They're removing the information that they want to redact. And what that risk is that there's possible data leaking through hidden ways, and that there's still information in that file that I'm removing the information from, but there could still be information in there, and it's getting passed to the redacted document. To get around that, people resorted to printing the document, redacting with a marker, and then scanning. Think of the Mueller report. The upside of that is that there's no information other than what is visible in the redacted document when it was scanned. The downside is that it's labor-intensive, wasteful of paper, and subject to degrading quality. The approach that we want to take is one that we call high security redactions, which is basically a digital method of the same thing. The difference is that instead of taking a PDF file and removing information, we build a brand new PDF file from a blank slate. So the process, the user uses the same process in that they perform markups on the document using redaction annotations. And then when the document's saved, we go ahead and we render each page to a bitmap and wrap the bitmaps into a new PDF file. And then optical character recognition is performed on the bitmaps, and invisible text is overlaid on top of the existing text so that we maintain searchability and copy-paste capability. Again, the steps performed by the user are exactly the same as a standard workflow. One of the nice features is that we can take an existing document and generate a high security version from one that's already been redacted. And for example, that Facebook document that even had the black rectangles that I showed earlier, one could run that through this process and it would basically become a high security redacted document. The underlying information under those black squares would not be there. There are trade-offs, obviously. There's loss in vector scalability, that you're likely going to end up with a larger file. But based on the cost in certain situations, as I showed, that you're going to avoid problems and you're ensured a full redaction and you've maintained searchability. There's no information hidden in image data, ICC profiles, fonts, or other private structures. There are a couple open source solutions out there to do this. One is MooPDF and the other is Ghostscript. They both have the ability to render, manipulate, and convert PDF files. Both applications support the integration of OCR solutions, and they're both currently integrated with the open source Tesseract OCR solution. Both applications allow the creation of high security PDF files. And MooPDF, which is more of a toolkit, actually allows you to add redaction annotations. Here I have some screenshots, for example, of an example application that's built with MooPDF, and I'll show you a link later where you can actually go and get this application. But what I've done here is I have a small document here, and I've selected a region here to add a redaction annotation. So it's just the password content here. And then when I go ahead and save that file, hopefully you can see this, it's kind of small on my screen. There's an option here that says high security. And so if I go ahead and select the high security option, a little warning comes up that says that this is a lossy process. Make sure to keep your original file safe. And I can specify a particular resolution to save the pages and also an OCR language. And then I went ahead and saved it, and I opened the file then in Acrobat Pro, and you can see that I'm able to select the text that's there. The password's been redacted, and if I select one of the areas here and looked at the information from Acrobat Pro, it says, yes, indeed, this is a 300 DPI image, and overlaid on top of that is text drawn with gray values of 0, which is basically white. So that was basically the creation process for creating the high security redaction output. There's command line tools that can be used with MooPDF and Ghostscript that allow the creation if you want to do this in a batch file type of thing. For example, both of these command lines here provide 300 DPI full color renderings of the pages. And here in this link, I forgot to mention, there's handouts available that you can get these slides actually through the interface here. And in the slides, there's a link to this address, and that'll take you to some demo applications. It'll take you to you can download that Windows application that I just showed a second ago. And also there's an iOS application, and I think the Android application is going to be available soon. I think that's kind of a work in progress, but it'll allow you to do on the mobile side high security redactions exactly as I described it. So I think that's all I had for the educational portion of the talk. Now I think I'm off into the commercial part of this. So Artifex software has been around for 30 years, and the actual development of Ghostscript began back in 1988. Here I have there's a list of kind of highlights of achievements over the years. I'm going to just chat about a couple of them because I only have 5 minutes here. So in 1993, Artifex released the first PDF interpreter before everyone except for Adobe. In 1996, Artifex released the first PCL XL interpreter before anyone but HP. In 2002, Artifex released the first PDF 1.4 transparency interpreter before anyone but Adobe. And in 2002, Kyocera released the first native PDF printer using GhostPDF. And then we fast forward all the way to 2020 with the release of the high security redactions solution. Artifex software, obviously we have our roots based in the open source community with both Ghostscript and MooPDF. We have a number of partners, over 150, including Adobe, Google, BlackBerry, Garmin, Dropbox. Our engineering staff is scattered across North America, Europe, and Asia. We are deeply committed to product quality and service and providing prompt and professional technical support. And we have flexible licensing arrangements. So there's always questions about open source and licensing. So both Ghostscript and MooPDF are dual license products in that there is an AGPL license. That's the one if you want to use the open source version of the code base, which is a viral infectious license, which if you have any code that's hooked up to it, that will also need to be AGPL. But there's also a commercial license, and that's who our customers, that is what our customers would use, and that allows them to use Ghostscript in any way or MooPDF in any way that they please, at least depending on the particular licensing arrangements that they have with Artifex software. Ghostscript, I really do believe is the #1 PDL conversion tool out there. It handles all the levels of PDF and PCL, HPGL, and PostScript. It does high-level conversions between PDF to PostScript, PostScript to PCL, PCL to XPS, and XPS to PDF, and it maintains the high-level vector content in those conversions. The code is tested using a number of test files from Quality Logic, the FTS, ATS, CET test suites, as well as proprietary customer files. Ghostscript's been around for obviously a long time. The code's been heavily exercised. It is an essential part of the Linux printing pipeline, and so we've gotten a lot of feedback and customer files over the years that have helped us exercise the code. There are API. There's bindings for using Ghostscript through Python, C# and Java, and with the project there's demo applications that show the use of those bindings. MooPDF is more of a toolkit. It's a very rich API in hooking in and doing manipulations to PDF files. Its really focus is towards the mobile market. It handles all the interactive PDF features, including annotations, form filling, digital signatures, has a very small footprint, has 8 bindings for multiple languages, including Java and Python, and also there's WebAssembly examples that are available for the project. It handles, again, similar to Ghostscript, a number of different inputs, but also includes some of the EPUB fiction book types of inputs. Final slide, because I'm probably running out of time. The final product is SmartOffice. This is a product that handles Microsoft Word, PowerPoint, Excel, PDF, all on the mobile environment. Allows you to view, edit, and create, and print, and present these documents. You can convert Microsoft documents to PDF, handles all the interactive features of PDF, securely integrates into an enterprise document workflow, and it's much, much smaller than Office 365. The application I showed earlier that you can go and download on iOS is basically a version of SmartOffice. that allows you to do the high security redactions. And that's all I have. I think Duff was going to move to questions now, if there were any. Thank you all for tuning in and listening. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. So let's indeed move to questions submitted during the presentation. And as a reminder to everyone in the webinar, you can absolutely submit questions to Michael right now through the questions pane in the control panel. During your webinar, Leonard Rosenthal actually asked a couple of questions, and I thought I could just get him to ask you himself directly,
Okay.
since a couple of them are fairly complex. So Leonard, I'm gonna unmute you. Go right ahead.
Thank you, Duff. Michael, great presentation. Really appreciate it, and especially you're calling out issues that we have in our product. And I've already sent those on to our engineering team, and hopefully we'll get those resolved as soon as possible. So wanted to start by thanking you for those.
Okay.
Definitely appreciate it. Just one question I had was your approach that you're taking for the your high security redaction. It seems to obviously remove any tagging for accessibility from the file. Have you or your customers found that to be a limitation? I know that that's one reason we don't take that approach is because governments and other regulated industries rely on the accessibility and tagging. But I'm curious to just hear how you guys have found that.
Right. So that is a great question. We have not. We're just kind of getting started on this process, and so that's something that we definitely are going to take a look at. And I do think that is critical. You're absolutely right, because that for accessibility reasons, it really somehow that content needs to be passed through. And I don't have an answer for that right now, but it's definitely something that we need to look at.
One question I have here: are you tied to Tesseract? Can other OCR engines be used?
We are absolutely not tied to Tesseract. The API for the OCR engine will allow one to hook up other engines, and yeah, that's the design was well done for that.